All right, that's enough. Might as well get going. No. So, surprising how few people have come to hear this topic, because it is of a fascination, you would say, of some of the earliest anthropological writings. And I know that you are in this class because of your dedication to the discipline and to the early writings of anthropologists. You really would love to go back, way back to the very beginning. And now that I'm thinking about it, I should have. I should have taken you back. If you think Durkheim and Marx and Weber, if you think those guys weren't very good on religion, we should go back to some super old people like E.B. Tylor and a book called The Golden Bough. I think now I'm even forgetting the author of that. So it's this was something that early anthropologists were very interested in, perhaps even more than kinship. That was kind of later on. And I think the idea behind it, or the prevailing idea, was an evolutionary one. That these early primitive peoples, they start with magic. And they try to control the world with their magic. But then eventually they graduate into the world of religion, where it gets more formalized. And then finally, they develop science. Or you could do it the opposite way, which is to say that people start to think that those who did not have science had religion, because they couldn't explain the world like we scientific folks. And those who didn't have religion even, they have magic, because they live in a world of superstition and magic. Yes, where you can make things happen. You could cast a spell upon me and make me cancel class, instead of just asking for it in a rational way. Because the idea is, were these other people logical? Were they logical like you and me? Or did you have to manipulate them with spells and little incantations? And instead of writing your final essay, you just incant it into being and cast a spell on the professor, and the professor will give you an A. So the idea was that, in fact, these people from before times, or maybe the people in our own times who were not part of the Western world, were not logical. They were following superstition, magic. Now, one of the key issues here, or one of the great summations of this question, is found in Guess on page 588, where he's talking about Evans-Pritchard and his work in Africa. And we'll see a little bit of this in a second. But one of the questions he asked is there are granaries where he worked, places where you'd store grain. And this grain was stored above ground. They'd have these stakes supporting it. And the termites would eat out the stakes over time. And every so often, people would be maybe under a granary to take shade, and it would fall. Somebody might get hurt. And so when this would happen, Evans-Pritchard asked them, well, what happened? And they said, well, that was witchcraft. You see? And he said, no, the termites ate out the beams. That's the scientific. And they said, yes, we know that. We know that termites eat this out. But why was that guy sitting under the granary when it collapsed? Because why did he have to be there at that exact time? That's something else. The explanation for it is beyond the scientific. So they accepted the scientific explanation. They knew about cause and effect in termites, but they wanted to know this other thing. So Well, actually, Tiana, you were interested in this Evans-Pritchard person. Okay, so a couple things. I mean, yeah, so I guess I should specify at the beginning that when Evans-Pritchard, and we're going to be saying a little film clip of some of the research they did, when he says witchcraft, he's actually not talking about the way that we see it in the West as a kind of either the negative thing or how it's been recuperated as Wicca. It's actually meant to refer to a specific idea in Zondi ideology about cause and effect and explanation. So I guess I should be clear about that. But you're absolutely right that these are sort of, he was one of the first people from the West to be perhaps more sensitive to the idea that this could be a logical system and that you should take this seriously. So to do that, I want to show you a little bit of the film, the first part one of strange beliefs, which, like Uncas, comes to us from a slightly older time. So this is actually part of a familiar strategy in anthropology to take something that seems strange and to make it more familiar to us. The idea that these beliefs might look weird, and perhaps because people called them things like witchcraft. Although, like I said, the idea that their ideas that Evans-Pritchard and other anthropologists and colonial officials were calling witchcraft really don't match at all to our own ideas of witchcraft. This was something as they said, was it was a malevolent force, but the people were not aware that it was working through them. So it wasn't, and that a witch doctor is someone who is trying to combat that malevolent force. But the idea is that, in fact, their ideas are logical, they're consistent enough, but they have a different point of departure. And so one of the messages of anthropology, or eventually from, like I said, Evans-Pritchard was one of the first to be more sensitive to these issues, is to watch out for these accusations that just because other people don't have the same ideas about science or religion, that means they are just irrational or superstitious. And I guess I would say that it isn't just that. Sometimes I think still to this day, we say, well, we have our scientific explanation and religion or magic fills in the gaps. It's what people can't explain. If they had science, they'd be fine. I think it's more of an issue is that science can't tell us, and deliberately cannot ever tell us, what we most want to know when something happens to us. And I like in the film that he talks about death as kind of the ultimate example of where these explanations come in. What do we most want to know that science, in fact, can never tell us, that is deliberately silent on this issue? What can't science tell us when something bad happens? Why? Right? That's what we want to know. Why did it happen? Why did it happen to me? Why did this person die? I was doing all the good stuff. I was given a good diet. I wasn't even smoking, and I still ended up in trouble, right? We saw this, we've seen this recently, like we know that viruses are out there, bacteria are out there. We know the scientific explanation, but why did I get sick? Right? And that other person that was sitting right next to me, she didn't even get sick, but I got sick. And now I'm coughing up a storm and feel terrible, but that person's just doing fine. Why? And science is like, well, viral load, blah, blah, blah. But you know that's baloney. You're like, no, I want to know why. Why did it happen to me? Now on Tuesday, we'll be reading about health, illness, and the body. So it's a good segue into that stuff. But well, that's part of the issue here, right? Sickness, health, especially things like death and birth and those kinds of things. That's where the idea of what our explanation systems are all fired up about the why part of things. And like I said, it's perfectly possible to combine some scientific beliefs with
ideas about, hey, what you really want to know, which is, hey, why is this happening? Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to do, I think I'm actually in some ways agreeing with you. It's that, the idea is, I mean, people expect, some people believe that if you have science, there's, that's not then you don't need religion anymore. And what I'm saying is science can't tell you one of the things that we most want to know about why things are, why the world is the way it is. It deliberately can't tell us. It can tell us what happened. It can tell us how it happened, but it can't tell us the sort of ultimate answer to good things or bad things. It can't do it. Now, you might decide that you don't need that ultimate why, and you're fine with things like coincidence or bad luck or something like that. Again, I make no claim here, and anthropology is not trying to tell us about the truth or the falsity of any religious system. It's just trying to explain why people fasten on to these ideas and they're so powerful. And I think one of the reasons is that, you won't find out why from Johnstown. Don't even try. But, I don't think anthropology can't tell us why either. One of the people who took this perhaps even further, you might say, than Evans-Pritchard. There's some great things in there where Evans-Pritchard is like, he says he doesn't believe in his own society. He doesn't believe in Zandi beliefs, but when he's there, he practices them and ends up believing them. Paul Stoller, in some ways, went to study and believe in sorcery. Kat, you look pretty completely. Yeah, he was actually an apprentice and he was really doing the work until he got attacked by sorcery and had to leave because he was like ill. He's a really nice guy, Paul Stoller, and I once saw a talk of his, and he does really challenge you to think about, what he was talking about, what happened to him in the field. But then later on, apparently, there were some other people who went in and tried to sort of basically go into this society and extract certain knowledge forms or become an apprentice and then leave. And there were some very powerful sorcerers in this society who said, I've had enough of these Westerners coming in and taking our knowledge, and I'm going to send some powerful sorcery out to them. And apparently, after that, some of these people actually got sick and like died and stuff. So he was like, whoa, So anyway, it's a really interesting idea. It's a little too much for me, but if you want to follow, be his friend on Facebook, he's a nice guy. There was one of his posts when he was walking around Philadelphia. Oh, you can follow him on Twitter too. There he is, just being a nice guy and talking to people. His latest book is called Wisdom from the Edge, Writing Ethnography in Turbulent Times. And he also had a little thing on YouTube that you can listen to. So anyway, really interesting stuff, and a person who is very also very interested in sharing findings, anthropology with the public, not just the academics. So, making the strange familiar. The other thing that anthropologists are, sort of the other side of this, is to take what might seem to be familiar and to make it strange. And so this is, I think, Pocock in the film says that we may not be as rational or as logical as our grandparents believed. The idea that our society is all rational, I think what has been in some ways challenged by the ways in which our society has gone along. But this is kind of one of the most famous articles that does this. It's an article that Gus discussed called Baseball Magic by the anthropologist George, I think that's a silent G, Melch. And Melch was an interesting person. He actually was a a semi-professional baseball player before he became an anthropologist. And basically what he did is he took things like Evans-Pritchard's work or Malinowski's work, and he's like, wait a second, that's what we do in baseball. We have these rituals that we like have to wear the same thing. And if we win, then we wear that color and we never wash our clothes. And so he basically talked about how many of the things that we might say is involved in modern life are actually intertwined with that kind of superstition. So this is a very famous article. It's got reprinted over and over in a book, an edited book called Conformity and Conflict, which would always have this kind of strange, familiar little duality. So you have the people those look like kind of like people from Papua New Guinea up top compared to people who are yelling at a football game. Or then this version came out of it where it was like, oh, some person solitary riding on a camel is kind of like somebody riding on a motorbike. Or this version where it's like, oh, these people at a rave are kind of like these people at the traditional dance. Or these is that what that is? Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Or these, I don't know what those are, the nuns covering their heads are kind of like these biker guys. You get the point, right? So that in some ways what seems strange or out there is actually familiar to us, and what might seem familiar to us can actually be seen as strange. So this is a very well-worn topic in anthropology. It comes to us for those of you who read the Naki Rama in Professor Sugandi's intro class, and we talked about in this class, but it certainly comes up a lot when we think about religion, magic, belief, science, those kinds of things.